Greenhaven was the kind of suburban neighborhood realtors boasted about in glossy brochures. Each house, constructed in neat, symmetrical rows, stood beneath towering oak trees that dappled the sidewalks with gentle shade. Birds nested in the tidy hedgerows, and the local park rang with the laughter of children. It was, by all appearances, a picture of small-town American charm. But like any community, Greenhaven had its tensions. Rumors thrived behind closed doors, and while most neighbors strove to maintain peace, there was one individual whose zeal for preserving standards repeatedly caused conflict. Her name was Marilyn Arliss, though almost everyone referred to her by the moniker Karen. A middle-aged woman with short, precisely styled hair and a fixed expression of stern authority, Marilyn had found her calling on the HOA board. She believed fervently that her duty was not just to maintain property values, but to enforce an almost militaristic uniformity. Woe to anyone who dared to deviate. Then there was David Caldwell, a quiet, gentle soul in his early 50s who had recently lost his beloved spouse, Margaret. Grief-stricken yet eager to keep his wife's memory close, David planted a small memorial garden on his front lawn. Initially, no one took special notice, except Marilyn. What began as an unassuming, heartfelt tribute would eventually ignite a neighborhood standoff, pitting compassion against unyielding dogma, culminating in an inspiring display of collective goodwill. What follows is the story of how one man's grief and hope clashed with a self-proclaimed enforcer, only to yield a remarkable blossoming of community spirit. David Caldwell had been a resident of Greenhaven for less than a year. He and Margaret had moved here hoping to spend their golden years in a peaceful, well-tended environment. Yet only 6 months after settling in, Margaret's health took a swift downturn. Cancer, discovered too late, carried her away in a matter of weeks. Devastated, David found himself alone in a tidy house whose corners still echoed Margaret's presence. Seeking solace, he decided to create a small garden by the front walkway, a living tribute to the woman he cherished. He worked meticulously, kneeling in the freshly turned soil, planting marigolds, daisies, and lavender, Margaret's favorite. In the center, he placed a simple stepping stone etched with her initials, MC. The sight of that little plot, dotted with bright flowers, offered him moments of peace. Each sunrise, David would step outside, coffee mug in hand, to murmur good morning to his wife's memory. Neighbors passing by noticed the gentle man whispering to a scattering of blossoms. Marilyn Karen Arliss, however, saw something else entirely. From her second-story window, diagonally across the street, she observed David at work. Day after day, she watched him water the small patch, tidy the edges, and hum softly. To Karen's hawkish gaze, the spot looked far from perfectly manicured. The flowers were ragged, the mulch uneven. She suspected some of the green shoots might not be ornamental plants at all, but pesky weeds. How unsightly, she thought. This is going to bring down property values. Frowning, Karen jotted notes in her ever-present HOA ledger. She suspected this new neighbor was too preoccupied with personal grief to realize he was violating the meticulously drafted bylaws. In Karen's world, emotional pleas seldom excused infractions. A few neighbors had already taken the time to check on David, offering condolences. An older man named Ernest Miller, who lived across the street, sometimes dropped off homemade cookies or shared a friendly wave. A sprightly woman named Lisa Brennan brought a small card and daisies of her own. Even the neighborhood children, intrigued by the quiet man who always smiled faintly, drew him pictures for his fridge. But David had yet to meet Marilyn Karen Arliss in a direct encounter, an inevitability in any HOA-ruled community. One morning, as he was carefully deadheading the wilting daisies to encourage new blooms, he heard sharp footsteps on the sidewalk. There stood a woman with an assertive stance, arms crossed over a crisp blouse, lips curving downward. "Hello," David greeted politely, rising to stand. Yes, David Caldwell," she interrupted. "I'm Marilyn Arliss, chair of the HOA Compliance Committee." She paused, as though expecting him to be impressed. "I noticed you've been busy planting." We have guidelines, you know. David blinked, wiping dirt from his palms onto his faded jeans. Oh yes, I've read them. I try to keep the plants within the recommended height. There's more to it than height restrictions, Karen said. She stepped closer, peering at the garden. We have to ensure uniformity, and from where I stand, your garden is not uniform with community standards. It appears haphazard, and I'm worried there may be weeds in the mix. David swallowed, an uneasy feeling knotting his stomach. I try to select flowers that my late wife loved. It's just a small patch, not. Karen's gaze flickered. I'm sorry for your loss, but we must apply rules equally. I'll give you a grace period to tidy up and replace any questionable foliage with something that meets aesthetic guidelines. If you have any questions, you can consult the official rulebook. Without waiting for a response, she walked off. David stood there, heart pounding. Anger, mingled with grief, welled up inside. Margaret had loved daisies precisely because they were simple, unpretentious. He looked at the memorial stepping stone, just 4 letters MC, reminding him of why he had done this in the first place. He resolved to comply as best he could while maintaining the soul of the tribute. Surely, he thought, there must be room in these rules for a quiet corner of remembrance. In the following weeks, David painstakingly pruned the garden, carefully removing any wild sprigs that might be deemed weeds. He replaced some daisies with petite, bushy plants that were listed on the HOA's approved flora document. He edged the patch with neat bricks, hoping that this extra step of organization would deter further complaints. For a while, all seemed peaceful. Then, late one afternoon, David found a large yellow envelope tucked under his welcome mat. The sender, Greenhaven Homeowners Association. Inside, he discovered a typed letter detailing a list of observed infractions, specifically citing an overabundance of unregistered plant species and an unacceptable level of organic debris. The letter demanded corrective action or a fine of $200 would be levied. David's hand shook as he read. He had tried so hard to abide by the rules. Confusion and frustration battled in his mind. He walked outside to examine the garden. Sure, a few leaves had fallen onto the mulch, but that was just nature. He noticed no unregistered plant species. Was it the lavender that Karen disliked? He called the HOA's main contact number, only to be referred back to the compliance committee, i.e., Karen. With a reluctant sigh, David left a polite voicemail, asking for clarity. Days passed with no response. Instead, he received another envelope, this time labeled Final Notice Before Fine. The letter threatened that if he did not rectify the situation within a week, the penalty would increase to $300. This time, David felt anger sharpen his voice. He marched across the street, knocked on Karen's door, and waited. Light footsteps approached, and the door opened a crack. Karen's face appeared, her expression radiating annoyance. Mr. Caldwell, she said evenly. I wasn't expecting you. I received more letters, he said, holding them up. I've done everything to follow the guidelines, but I'm being told I'm violating them again. Can we discuss exactly what's wrong? Karen pursed her lips. You've replaced some of those unruly daisies, but I still see evidence of weed infiltration and yard debris. We have standards in Greenhaven, Mr. Caldwell. David's cheeks flushed, but it's only a few dried leaves that blow onto the soil. I remove them daily. Karen shrugged. Then I suggest you remove them more frequently. If it's truly a memorial for your wife, perhaps you could place a tasteful plaque near your front door and skip the garden. Something more discreet. David's chest tightened. The callousness of her suggestion, to remove the flowers altogether, shook him. Margaret loved flowers, he said softly. I'm not removing them. Karen nodded briskly. Then you'll need to abide by the rules. Have a good day, Mr. Caldwell. She closed the door. Stunned, David walked home, a swirl of helplessness gnawing at him. He realized that this quiet conflict had only just begun. Despite David's best efforts to eliminate every stray leaf or renegade sprout, he received another HOA notice in less than 2 weeks. This one included a formal invoice, $300 due within 30 days. Failure to pay would result in escalating fines and potential legal action. That morning, David sat on his living room couch, reading the letter repeatedly in disbelief. He had scrimped together retirement savings, but an unexpected medical bill from Margaret's final weeks had drained much of his funds. The fines seemed cruelly punitive, especially for a garden that was hardly imposing. He pictured Margaret's face, her gentle smile, her hand on his arm, and felt fresh waves of grief for both her absence and his current predicament. To pay or not to pay? He could refuse, but that might set him down a path of confrontation with the HOA, a path he sensed Karen was all too eager to travel. Defeated, David wrote out a check, sealed it in an envelope, and made his way to the HOA office in the community center. It felt like a betrayal of what the memorial garden stood for, a gesture of love overshadowed by bureaucratic demands. As David dropped off the payment, he tried to reason with the office assistant, a weary-looking woman named Kathy. "Could you please just tell Ms. Heartless that I'll do whatever it takes to keep the garden in line? I want to make sure I'm following the rules." Kathy offered a sympathetic smile. "I'll pass the message along," she said gently. "You're not the only one. A number of residents have had difficulties with Ms. Heartless's enforcement style." He thanked her and walked out. The phrase, "you're not the only one," echoed in his mind. Perhaps, he thought, he wasn't as isolated as he felt. That evening, a light knock on David's front door startled him from reverie. He'd spent the afternoon idly rearranging photos of Margaret, trying to keep himself from sinking too deep in his sorrow. Opening the door, he found Ernest Miller standing on the porch, holding a small bag of homemade biscuits. "Mind if I come in?" Ernest asked kindly. David stepped back. "Of course. Please." They settled at the kitchen table, the quiet hum of the refrigerator punctuating the silence. Ernest sighed, setting down the biscuits. "I heard you got a fine. People are talking. It's not right, you know." David forced a small smile. "I appreciate your concern, but I don't want any trouble. Marilyn has been like this for ages," Ernest said, shaking his head. "You're not the first person she's targeted. She always finds some so-called infraction, especially if it's something personal. She got upset with me once for planting sunflowers in my backyard, said they were too tall. Last year, she nearly drove a new family out for having a small trampoline that apparently violated an obscure rule about unapproved yard equipment." David listened, uneasy. "I guess I got on her bad side, but it's for Margaret. This garden is all I have left of her." Ernest patted David's shoulder. "Everyone in the neighborhood knows what your flowers mean. We support you. Some are just too afraid to stand up. You're new. You might not know how controlling she can get." He paused, eyes kind. "But you do have allies." "Thank you," David said, voice trembling. He hadn't realized how badly he needed someone else's reassurance. "I'm not sure what I can do. If I keep planting, she'll keep finding me. But if I uproot everything, I'm letting go of Margaret in a way." Ernest nodded. "Don't give up yet. Let's see if we can reason with the HOA board directly, not just Marilyn. Maybe if enough neighbors speak up, they'll scale back these petty fines." David agreed to attend the next HOA meeting, heart a little lighter at the thought that he wasn't alone. He walked Ernest to the door, grateful for his warmth. Outside, he glanced at Margaret's memorial garden under the moonlight. The petals glowed softly, a testament to love amidst the looming threat of more fines. The resolution to stand up for that love took root in his heart that night. Greenhaven's HOA board met monthly at a modest community hall near the entrance to the subdivision. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows, facing a long table where the board members sat. By the time David arrived for the next session, the room was already more crowded than he expected. He spotted Karen at one end of the board's table, flipping through a thick binder. Ernest waved David over, offering him a seat beside Lisa Brennan and a few others. Lisa squeezed David's arm in silent support. A murmur of hushed conversations floated through the room. Shortly after 6 o'clock, Bradley Schaefer, the HOA president, called the meeting to order. A tall, balding man with a somewhat weary air, Bradley scanned the crowd before launching into the agenda. A financial report, a security update, and, finally, community concerns. When the floor opened for public comment, Ernest nudged David forward. Heart-pounding, David stood, hands clasped together. "Good evening," he began. "I'm David Caldwell, and I have a concern regarding repeated fines related to my memorial garden. His voice trembled slightly, but he pressed on. My wife passed away a few months ago. I planted a small patch of flowers in her honor, and I've tried to follow all guidelines. Yet I've received fines labeling the flowers as weeds and the space as an eyesore. I'd like to request a review of these penalties. There was a moment of stillness. Karen peered down at her binder, lips pursed. One board member, a woman named Irene Colson, leaned forward. A memorial garden? That sounds lovely. Have you received details explaining exactly which rules you violated? David shook his head. No, I've just been told to remove unapproved species and prevent debris. I've done so repeatedly, yet I was fined anyway. Karen cleared her throat. If I may, Mr. Caldwell's front yard was found to have unregistered plants that do not align with the community's landscaping requirements. Our rules exist to maintain a consistent aesthetic. Emotional reasons, while understandable, cannot exempt a resident from compliance. Bradley frowned. Marilyn, could you specify which plants are disallowed? She rattled off some policy codes. Section 4.3.2 states that any ornamental plants not recognized within the official horticultural list must be pre-approved. Section 6.1 prohibits ornamental displays that disrupt uniformity or create visual clutter. David felt anger flaring. They're flowers, marigolds and daisies, hardly invasive or unsightly. A few neighbors murmured in agreement. Lisa spoke up. I've seen David's garden. It's well kept and respectful. There's no clutter. This is ridiculous. Karen's cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth, but Bradley intervened. Let's calm down. We can schedule a site visit. Marilyn, as compliance chair, you'll accompany at least one other board member. We'll evaluate the garden in person, see if these plants truly violate guidelines. Karen pressed her lips together but nodded curtly. David, shoulders sagging with relief, thanked the board. He hoped the site visit might grant him a fair review. Yet he couldn't shake the sensation of Karen's steely gaze trailing him as he returned to his seat. That stare conveyed a silent promise. She wasn't giving up easily. The site visit took place on a warm Saturday morning. David had spent the previous evening meticulously trimming, mulching, and even adding a small sign that read, "In loving memory of Margaret Caldwell." He'd worried the sign might bring more HOA scrutiny, but it felt right to make the dedication explicit. If they saw the sincerity of his intent, maybe they'd relent. Bradley Schaefer and Irene Colson arrived first, exchanging polite greetings with David. Karen appeared shortly afterward, binder clutched in one hand, phone in the other. She hardly looked at David, striding straight to the flower bed as though on a mission. The trio inspected each plant, from the neat ring of marigolds to the lavender in the back corner. Irene crouched, running her hand lightly over the soil. This looks well maintained, she observed, turning to Bradley. I see no debris except a few stray petals. Seems normal. Karen pursed her lips. The daisies were replaced with marigolds, yes. But the code also says any structure beyond standard plantings, such as decorative stones or signage, requires prior approval. She pointed accusingly at the small commemorative sign. David took a breath. I added that sign to clarify it's a memorial. It's no bigger than a foot wide. Karen glanced triumphantly at her notes. Section 5.4.1 states that any signage on front lawns must be pre-approved by the board. That includes memorial signs, yard sale notices, and political endorsements. Bradley sighed. In practice, we've rarely enforced the sign rule unless it's something extreme or placed too long. Irene, do you think this sign is a problem? Irene shook her head. It's quite tasteful. I see no reason not to grant an exception, especially under these circumstances. Exactly, David said softly. I'm not displaying a neon billboard, just a small tribute to my late wife. Karen pressed her lips into a thin line. The rules must be applied uniformly. If we grant an exception for every sign, Irene looked exasperated. We're not talking about every sign. This is a unique situation. Karen, unmoved, tapped her phone screen. I see no grounds for an exception. If you want the sign, apply for the official variance. Until then, it's a violation. Bradley cleared his throat. We can handle a variance request today if we want to expedite. I see no harm in that. Marilyn, you don't have sole authority to deny it. The board can vote. An awkward silence descended. Karen's eyes flickered with irritation. Fine, she said briskly. Put it to a vote at the next session. Meanwhile, the garden must remain free of unapproved elements, or we continue issuing fines. Disheartened, David watched the 3 HOA representatives depart. Bradley offered an apologetic shrug. Irene gave him a sympathetic pat on the arm, and Karen marched off without a word. Though the site visit hadn't resulted in an immediate new fine, it also hadn't brought closure. A formal vote was looming, another bureaucratic hurdle orchestrated by Karen. The tension around David's garden seeped into everyday conversation among the neighbors. Some empathized with David's grief and found Karen's relentless enforcement heartless. Others feared Karen's reputation, worrying that if they sided openly with David, she might turn her scrutinizing gaze on them next. Behind this backdrop of caution, a quiet network began to form. Ernest Miller served as an informal connector, relaying stories of Karen's past run-ins with other residents. Lisa Brennan, a warm presence, started collecting supportive comments from neighbors who privately pledged solidarity. She encouraged them to attend the upcoming HOA meeting to speak on David's behalf. One evening, David came home to find a small envelope on his porch, addressed in neat handwriting. "We're with you." Inside was a card bearing a simple message. "Your garden from Margaret is beautiful. Some of us want you to know we support keeping it. Don't give up." It was unsigned, but David recognized Lisa's handwriting. Something about that small gesture brought tears to his eyes, tears of appreciation rather than despair. At the same time, Karen was not idle. She circulated an email among the more conservative-leaning residents, warning them that if we allow one person to circumvent the guidelines, we invite chaos. She highlighted that David's sign had been placed without formal request, framing him as a rule breaker. She reminded recipients that our property values hinge on uniformity, urging them to vote against any special exemptions. The community seemed poised on a knife's edge. David's memorial garden, a small patch of blooms intended to honor a life gone too soon, had become a battleground where empathy and inflexibility clashed. Day by day, the upcoming HOA vote loomed larger, an impending showdown that would determine the garden's fate, and perhaps more, the very spirit of Greenhaven. A few days before the scheduled HOA meeting, David woke to a heartbreaking sight. His neat row of marigolds was torn up, petals scattered, stems snapped. The commemorative sign lay face down in the mulch, its wooden stake split. Horror and grief swirled inside him as he bent to pick up the battered remains. This was no mere accident. Someone had deliberately vandalized Margaret's memorial. Shaken, he immediately phoned Ernest, who rushed over alongside Lisa. Together, they surveyed the damage. "This is disgusting," Lisa whispered, tears glinting in her eyes. "Who would do such a thing?" Ernest shook his head, face grim. "We can guess, but we don't have proof." David's mind flitted to Karen, though it felt extreme, even for her. Could she have orchestrated or encouraged this? Or had some other neighbor, emboldened by the strict talk of no exceptions, taken matters into their own hands? Rage churned in David's chest. Rage that someone would desecrate a tribute to a woman who had hurt no one. Ernest placed a hand on David's shoulder. "We should call the police, file a vandalism report." Lisa nodded. "Yes, and we should photograph everything before we clean up." Though David's hands shook, he took pictures with his phone. Then, together, they carefully gathered the shredded petals and broken stems. Some neighbors stopped by, drawn by the commotion, their faces registering shock and sympathy. Word spread quickly. It seemed everyone in Greenhaven had an opinion. Was this the work of a bored teenager or something more malicious? David noticed one figure lurking at a distance. Karen, observing from her driveway across the street. She made no move to help, instead stepping inside once she realized others were watching her. That single glance of hers, full of grim disapproval, sent a chill through David's spine. He couldn't read her expression. Was it triumph? Worry? or was something else entirely? By evening, David had filed a police report, though there was little the authorities could do without witnesses or security footage. Exhausted, he fell into a restless sleep, haunted by visions of torn petals scattered like confetti across his yard. The vandalism proved to be the final straw for many residents, who felt that the hostility had gone too far. Whether Karen was personally responsible or not, her crusade had created an environment where someone believed it was acceptable to destroy a grieving widower's memorial. In response, several neighbors formed a plan, Operation Blossom. Spearheaded by Lisa, the idea was to replant David's garden bigger and more beautiful than before. They coordinated a weekend gathering, inviting all who wanted to show support. People contributed flower bulbs, potted plants, soil, and decorative stones. One couple even donated a small statue of an angel holding a single daisy. At first, David resisted the offer of help, worried about inciting more fines. But Lisa insisted, if we unite, the HOA can't fine us all, and we'll fight it if they try. On Saturday morning, the sun rose over a procession of cars and wheelbarrows arriving at David's driveway. The sense of camaraderie was palpable. Neighbors, some who barely knew each other, worked side by side, chatting softly. David stood among them, emotions swirling between gratitude and heartbreak. Even children joined in, eager to help plant seeds or place colorful stones around the border. By midday, the garden had transformed into a lush tapestry of marigolds, daisies, daffodils, and even clusters of roses. Lisa carefully installed a new sign, carved from durable wood, in loving memory of Margaret Caldwell, forever in our hearts. Beneath it, they placed small stepping stones painted by local kids, each stone bearing a single word such as hope, love, or remember. As David watered the newly planted bed, tears traced lines down his cheeks. "Thank you," he whispered, voice trembling with emotion. Margaret would be so touched. Ernest nodded, placing a supportive hand on David's back. "We're proud to stand with you." Across the street, Karen watched from behind curtained windows. Whether she felt anger, remorse, or shock, no one knew. The gesture of community spirit had blossomed literally on her doorstep, defying her attempts to maintain strict uniformity. And the garden was bigger, brighter, and more visible than ever. The following Monday evening, residents filed into the community hall for the much-anticipated HOA meeting. A hush of expectancy hung in the air. David arrived with Ernest and Lisa by his side, joined by a larger group of neighbors who had helped with Operation Blossom. The turnout was the largest in recent memory. Dozens of people, some standing against the walls, all waiting for the moment when David's case would be addressed. At the board's table, Karen sat near the center, an unusual shift from her usual seat at the far right. Bradley Schaefer opened proceedings, and, after a few routine matters, moved to the main item, variance request, Memorial Garden at 1142 Tulip Lane. Karen wasted no time. She rose, binder in hand. "I'd like to note that since our last meeting, Mr. Caldwell's garden has been altered significantly and may now include unauthorized additions beyond the scope of what was previously assessed." A wave of exasperated murmurs swept the audience. Ernest shot to his feet. "Those unauthorized additions are flowers, planted by volunteers after someone trashed David's memorial." Karen's expression hardened. "Vandalism is unfortunate, yes, but that doesn't excuse ignoring protocol. There's a process for such projects." Lisa stood next. "We're requesting a variance to allow the memorial garden in its current form. It's well-maintained, and the entire community pitched in. It's hardly an eyesore." Bradley cleared his throat. "Let's keep order. We will hear from both sides." David, heart-pounding, addressed the board. "I have no desire to break rules. I only want to honor my wife's memory. The garden is tidy, the plants are common ornamentals, and the sign is a simple dedication. Many neighbors have supported me. I'm asking for your compassion and understanding." For a moment, silence. Then Irene Colson spoke gently. "I've visited Mr. Caldwell's property, and it's a tasteful display. I propose we approve the variance under the condition that the garden is maintained and does not expand further without additional approval." A handful of board members nodded. Even Bradley seemed amenable. Then Karen chimed in once more. The board must consider the precedent this sets. If we allow a permanent memorial garden in one front yard, others might follow suit. Soon, we'll have benches, statues, shrines, undermining the uniform aesthetic that keeps property values high. Her words hung in the air. David sensed a few heads shaking in the crowd. Others, likely silent supporters of strict enforcement, nodded grimly. Bradley took a deep breath. We need a motion. Irene raised her hand. I moved to grant a variance for Mr. Caldwell's memorial garden, with the condition that the sign remain within a certain size and the plantings do not exceed the current area. A second board member immediately seconded. Karen's face went ashen. Bradley distributed ballots, and the board members scribbled quickly. Tension crackled. Then Bradley counted the votes aloud. 6 in favor, 2 against. A cheer rose from the audience. Ernest clasped David's shoulder in triumph, while Lisa grinned widely. David exhaled in relief, gratitude flooding him. Meanwhile, Karen sat stiff, her fists clenched. She had lost the battle on official grounds. But as David glimpsed her gaze, a mix of fury and resentment, he couldn't help a shudder. Her fight might not be over yet. In the wake of the board's decision, many residents hoped the controversy would settle. David's memorial garden was now legitimate, a recognized installation. Yet that very legitimacy seemed to irk Karen more than ever. Her tactics shifted from overt fines to more insidious maneuvers. Within a week of the variance approval, David received a curt letter from the HOA compliance desk, citing him for unapproved decorative stones. This time, the claim was that the stepping stones painted by neighborhood children were considered a separate structural element requiring their own variance. The letter threatened a fine if those stones were not removed. Exasperated, David brought the letter to Irene Colson. She shook her head in disbelief. Unapproved decorative stones? That's splitting hairs. I can assure you, the board didn't instruct her to send this. She's acting unilaterally again. Lisa posted about the new citation on the neighborhood's online forum, prompting a wave of outraged comments. Some residents defended Karen's adherence to rules. The majority decried the pettiness. In response, Ernest suggested they fight this new citation the same way they had the overall variance, gathering community support. Meanwhile, Karen ramped up an email campaign, accusing the Caldwell Memorial of constantly growing and attempting to bypass the association's oversight. She repeated her warning about property values, claiming that if the stepping stones were allowed to remain, soon entire front yards would become personalized shrines. She found a small faction of supporters, some older residents who believed wholeheartedly in rigid uniformity. Though a minority, they were vocal, appearing on the neighborhood forum to echo Karen's words. As tension simmered, David tried to keep his spirits up. He spent more time tending the garden, adjusting the arrangement of flowers, and sweeping away any stray debris that could spark another complaint. Some days, he felt like a caretaker fending off an endless swarm of critical eyes. But each time he stood by Margaret's stepping stone, MC, he remembered why he endured. This was the final gift he could give her, a quiet corner of blooming life, a testament to a love that refused to be forgotten. The stepped-up aggression from Karen unwittingly fueled a groundswell of support for David. Neighbors who had previously kept quiet began stepping forward, determined to curtail Karen's harassment. A kind man named Jerome Bryant, who had faced his own battles with Karen over a small water fountain in his front yard, became a vocal advocate. Nadia Patel, a working mother whose child's playset had been targeted for unapproved coloring, also joined the growing coalition. They all shared stories of petty citations and inflated fines. Soon, these allies formed an organized group they informally dubbed Green Haven Neighbors for Fairness. Meeting in Lisa's living room, they compiled documentation of Karen's questionable enforcement actions, letters, email exchanges, photos of supposed infractions that seemed groundless. The idea was to present this evidence to the rest of the HOA board, demonstrating that Karen was wielding her power arbitrarily. David attended these gatherings quietly, still somewhat uncomfortable with being the focal point of so much activity. But each meeting reminded him that he wasn't alone. He saw how Karen's relentless policing had impacted many others, each with a story to tell. From fine holiday decorations to forced removals of children's chalk drawings, the pattern of overreach was undeniable. There was even talk of amending the association's bylaws to limit the compliance chair's unilateral authority. Irene, sympathetic to the cause, hinted that if enough residents formally petitioned the board, an amendment could be proposed at the next annual HOA members' meeting. It was a significant step, requiring the support of a substantial number of property owners. But the appetite for change was palpable. While the wheels turned behind the scenes, David found solace in daily routines. He rose at dawn to water the memorial garden, greeting Margaret in quiet reflection. The expanded flowers thrived, radiant under the sun. Neighborhood children sometimes left little trinkets, a painted rock or a small figurine, near the stepping stones. Each gesture felt like a gentle whisper, "We're with you." Karen continued sending petty notices about the stones, the angel statue, or the arrangement of mulch, but David's thickening file of community support emboldened him. Soon, a confrontation was inevitable, and this time, David had a chorus of voices ready to stand at his side. Despite the widely recognized variance, fines still arrived in David's mailbox, always under some new technicality. The amounts range from $50 to $100 for each alleged violation. When the total crept over $500, he resolved not to pay another cent without fighting it. He scheduled a meeting with Bradley Schaefer, and in a small office at the community center, he laid out the entire saga. "This is harassment," David stated firmly, exhaustion etched on his face. "I have a board-approved variance for my garden. Now Ms. Arliss is fining me for stepping stones and ornamental statues. She's crossing lines." Bradley listened with a deepening frown, flipping through the file of letters David had brought. These citations come from the compliance department, presumably at Marilyn's request. The rest of the board wasn't consulted. David spread his hands. "I'm happy to follow fair guidelines, but this is malicious. I'm also not the only one. I have statements from at least a dozen neighbors with similar complaints." Bradley sighed heavily. "I am aware. There's a growing dissatisfaction. The truth is, Marilyn has been the most active compliance chair we've had. She claims she's just enforcing the rules rigorously, but this level of conflict is unprecedented." He paused, meeting David's gaze. "Look, I can place these fines on hold pending a board review. We'll sort this out at the next board meeting." "Thank you," David said, relief washing over him. When Bradley informed Karen that the fines would be paused, her reaction was swift and furious. She sent out a mass email alleging the board was capitulating to emotional blackmail, and she threatened to resign from her position if they didn't support her authority. However, that ultimatum did not have the intended effect. Instead of rallying behind her, many residents responded with calls for her removal. The blowback from her own aggressiveness was starting to undermine her position on the board altogether. Karen found herself isolated. Gone were the days when her stern reputation sufficed to intimidate. David's garden, ironically, had sparked a broader rebellion against her heavy-handed approach. The more she tried to penalize David, the more neighbors came together to protect him, and by extension, themselves. In the lull before the next HOA meeting, something beautiful happened. Encouraged by the story of David's memorial, a wave of spontaneous kindness swept Greenhaven. Without central coordination, several residents began small projects in their own yards, adding rose bushes, bird baths, or custom stepping stones with words of love or encouragement. Some designed tiny pollinator gardens for bees and butterflies. Others installed subtle tributes, like a single wind chime hanging from a branch, dedicated to a lost family member. Far from chaos, these mini expressions lent Greenhaven a fresh vibrancy. As people strolled through the neighborhood, they admired each other's creativity. It was as though David's fight for a simple memorial had awakened a collective desire for personal touches that were still tasteful, still respectful, yet undeniably heartfelt. The uniformity that once ruled the neighborhood began to soften into a mosaic of individuality bound by mutual respect. Even the children embraced the shift. Chalk drawings sprouted on driveways, illustrating flowers, suns, and stick-figure families. Where Karen's watchful gaze might once have deterred them, they felt emboldened by a sense that something was changing in Greenhaven. An undercurrent of shared hope ran through every block. Each afternoon, David walked slowly along the sidewalks, marveling at the subtle transformations. He paused to admire a neighbor's new rose arch, or to compliment a mother and child who were planting pansies. They'd smile, nod, and sometimes whisper, "Thank you for inspiring us." It felt surreal to David, who had never sought to be any kind of leader or symbol. His only motive was love for Margaret. Yet the effect of that love, tempered by adversity, had reached far beyond the little patch of ground in his front yard. If Margaret were watching, he hoped she'd be proud. Meanwhile, rumors circulated that Karen was under intense scrutiny from other board members who saw her actions as liability risks for the HOA. Some speculated the board might ask for her resignation. Others suggested they might remove her via an internal vote. Rare but not unprecedented. Irene Colson, quietly supportive of David, tried once more to reason with Karen in a private conversation. Irene proposed that Karen could step down gracefully from the compliance chair position while retaining a lesser board role, thus avoiding public humiliation. Karen, however, bristled at the suggestion. "I have done nothing but uphold the rules," she insisted, eyes flashing. "Why should I be the scapegoat for a wave of sentimentality? What's next? A yard full of tombstones?" Irene attempted to explain that the majority of residents simply wanted balanced enforcement and empathy for unique situations. Karen refused to listen. She stormed out of the informal meeting, muttering about weak leadership and an emotional mob. Word of Karen's obstinacy spread quickly. Some felt pity for her. Perhaps she was clinging to her sense of control because she feared a slip in property values or some deeper personal insecurity. Others saw no excuse for her behavior. David tried to remain compassionate. He recognized that losing Margaret had reshaped his world. Perhaps Karen had pains of her own. But he couldn't condone her hostility any more than he could uproot Margaret's flowers. Just days before the HOA's annual members' meeting, where bylaw amendments and board positions would be discussed, an unexpected piece of information about Karen came to light. Lisa's cousin, who lived in a neighboring town, recalled that Marilyn Arliss had lost her own sister some years back under tragic circumstances. According to local gossip, Karen's sister had been ill, and the two women had been estranged at the time of her passing, leaving Karen with unresolved guilt. Lisa shared this revelation at a small gathering in Ernest's home. David, startled, felt a pang of empathy. "That doesn't excuse her behavior," he said softly, "but it might help explain it." He imagined how grief, when mishandled, could manifest as the need to control everything. Yet her condemnation of David's memorial for Margaret seemed especially cruel in that light, like a twisted projection of her own regret. Some neighbors suggested reaching out to Karen on a personal level, hoping to defuse her anger through understanding. Others felt that approach had little chance of success, given how entrenched she was in her role. Nonetheless, David found himself wishing he could talk to her, let her see the garden not as a threat, but as a gesture of love that might resonate with her own loss. The neighborhood, however, had grown tired of waiting for Karen to reciprocate any empathy. The train of change had left the station, and it was speeding toward the next major meeting where decisive action awaited. On a crisp autumn evening, the large recreation hall filled to near capacity for Greenhaven's annual HOA members' meeting. Unlike the smaller monthly board meetings, this event welcomed every resident to vote on major issues like rule amendments and board positions. Tension crackled in the air, fueled by the controversies swirling around Karen. David sat among friends. Ernest, Lisa, Jerome, Nadia, and others, his heart pounding. He had never been one for public speaking, but he had added his name to a list of those who would address the assembly on the subject of compliance reform. Meanwhile, Karen sat at the front, her binder stacked with papers, her expression unreadable. The meeting began with routine announcements about the budget, security patrol updates, and upcoming community events. Then, the time arrived for proposed bylaw amendments. Irene stepped forward to present the Compliance Oversight Amendment, which aimed to limit the compliance chair's unilateral power to levy fines without prior board review. It also provided for an appeals process that required at least 2 board members to agree before a fine could be imposed. Irene spoke clearly. This amendment is designed to ensure fairness and transparency. Our community thrives when we have guidelines that are enforced consistently, without personal bias. We've all seen in recent months how the current structure can lead to conflict and hurt feelings. A murmur of agreement swept the hall. Karen's face tightened. She stood next, launching a rebuttal. These changes dilute the HOA's ability to maintain standards. We risk turning Greenhaven into a chaotic free-for-all where every whim is allowed. If you undermine the compliance chair's role, you undermine our property values. Murmurs turned into scattered boos. Yet some residents nodded, still reluctant to alter the status quo. The tension rose as community members lined up to speak. Several, including Jerome and Nadia, offered examples of fines they had received from Karen for what they deemed trivial infractions. Finally, David stepped to the microphone. His voice was soft but resolute. My garden, a memorial to my late wife, became a battleground. I was fined multiple times, even after receiving a variance. This conflict should never have happened. I'm not against having rules, but there must be oversight to prevent personal vendettas. No one should experience the vandalism, the harassment, or the emotional toll that I did. The hall fell silent. Karen sat rigidly, avoiding his gaze. Bradley Schaefer moved the discussion toward a vote. The ballots were distributed, marked, and collected. Time seemed to crawl as volunteers counted. At last, Bradley announced the result. The amendment passed with a clear majority. Applause erupted. David felt tears prick his eyes as Ernest patted his back, and Lisa beamed. Karen, though, remained motionless, her lips a thin line. With the Compliance Oversight Amendment enacted, the board structure shifted. Karen could no longer issue fines or citations independently. Each complaint required a second board member's written agreement. Effective immediately, all pending fines, including those against David, were placed under review. A wave of relief swept the neighborhood. Karen's frustration, however, boiled over. During the meeting's final segment, board elections, she was up for reappointment to her position. The members voted decisively against her, choosing to elect a new compliance chair, a soft-spoken but fair-minded man named Russell Kane. Karen's defeat was resounding. Furious, she stormed out before the meeting concluded, leaving her binder behind. Most residents, tired of her antagonism, felt only relief as she departed. Still, David couldn't help a flicker of sympathy. He knew the bitter taste of grief and regret, though he would never justify her actions. In the days that followed, Karen was conspicuously absent from public view. Some said she was packing up to move out. Others claimed she had simply holed up, refusing to engage with neighbors. For Greenhaven, an era of rigid intimidation seemed to have ended. The contrast was palpable. People felt freer to decorate, plant, and personalize their homes within reasonable limits, all under the balanced oversight of Russell and the newly empowered board. The question lingering in many minds was simple. Would Karen seek retribution before leaving? David tried not to dwell on it. After all, the entire neighborhood had spoken. The garden, once threatened, was now a cherished fixture. Its presence validated not just by a piece of paper, but by the warm sentiments of 100 hearts. As autumn leaves turned gold and red, David's memorial garden glowed with a new seasonal palette. Marigolds and daisies gave way to chrysanthemums, carefully planted by volunteers who still stopped by to help. The stepping stones remained, each an enduring message of support. With the compliance wars seemingly settled, neighbors decided to host a community harvest day, an outdoor event celebrating the changing season and the spirit of unity that had blossomed after so much conflict. Tables of homemade pies, apple cider, and caramel-dipped apples lined the sidewalks. Children played games, and local musicians serenaded small clusters of families chatting under the trees. David found himself at the heart of the festivities, graciously accepting hugs and kind words from people he'd never even spoken with before. "Thank you for being the catalyst," said one woman, pressing a baked treat into his hand. "Your courage showed us we don't have to be afraid of overbearing rules." Touched, David tried to credit everyone else, acknowledging how they had come together. But the sentiment remained. His memorial garden had become a symbol of love, triumphing over cold regulation. The harvest day felt like a collective exhalation of relief and joy. In a moment of quiet reflection, David wandered over to the garden. The day's golden sunlight fell across the stepping stone etched with MC. He knelt, brushing away a stray leaf, and whispered softly, "Margaret, I hope you see this. We did it." A gentle breeze rustled through the mums, as though in response. Just when the neighborhood believed Karen was a relic of the past, an unsettling incident reminded them she remained a force to be reckoned with. Late one evening, a neighbor spotted a figure near David's garden, appearing to inspect the stepping stones with a flashlight. Alarmed, the neighbor called out, and the figure fled. Though they didn't catch a clear glimpse, many suspected it was Karen. The next morning, David noticed a small mound of what looked like herbicide granules scattered around the base of his chrysanthemums. He acted quickly, removing the suspicious substance and washing the soil. Lisa phoned the police, who filed another report of attempted vandalism, though again there was no proof it was Karen. Still, the message was clear. Someone wanted to sabotage the garden. Word spread swiftly, sparking outrage. Even the new compliance chair, Russell Kane, publicly condemned the act, offering to install a motion-activated camera on David's property. Ernest and Jerome organized a neighborhood watch group, taking turns patrolling at night. People refused to stand idly by. Though David was deeply disturbed by the incident, he refused to let fear overshadow everything the community had accomplished. He accepted Russell's offer, placing a small camera near the porch, angled to capture the garden. Neighbors pledged to keep an eye out for any late-night prowlers. The circle of solidarity tightened once more, reinforcing that the garden now belonged to everyone's sense of communal pride, and no single saboteur could intimidate them. In the days that followed, no further vandalism occurred. Perhaps the new security measures deterred any would-be destroyer. Karen was reportedly packing to relocate, though no official sale sign appeared in her yard. A hush fell over the question of her whereabouts. Some speculated she had quietly rented out her home and was moving in with a relative elsewhere. Meanwhile, David received an anonymous letter in his mailbox, this time in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside were the words, "I'm sorry." No signature, no return address. He wondered if it could be from Karen, or perhaps from someone else who once supported her stance. Regardless, he felt a surprising lightness. It seemed possible that regrets were surfacing, that hearts might be shifting toward empathy, even if quietly. Winter crept in, frosting the memorial garden's soil and withering most of the blooms. David, with help from Lisa and a few children, placed small evergreen sprigs where the flowers once stood, ensuring Margaret's place of honor didn't vanish in the cold months. They hung a tiny set of winter bells, which jingled softly in the wind, a soothing reminder of life and love even in the dead of winter. Despite the chill, the neighborhood's warmth persisted. People offered each other help shoveling snow, lent a hand with holiday decorations, and smiled more often in passing. The sense of tension that once permeated Green Haven had receded dramatically. Change had not destroyed the community's values. Rather, it had brought them to life in a more inclusive way. With the new year approaching, the HOA board planned a vision meeting, inviting residents to discuss what they wanted for Green Haven's future. David initially hesitated to participate. He'd had enough HOA drama to last a lifetime, but Lisa, Ernest, and others urged him to attend. They believe his experience offered a vital lesson about compassion and governance. When David arrived at the community hall, he found a very different atmosphere from the fractious gatherings of the past. Russell Kane welcomed everyone warmly, encouraging them to share hopes, concerns, and creative ideas. The focus was on fostering a neighborhood that balanced guidelines with personal expression. During open discussion, David recounted how the memorial garden had begun. "I just wanted to honor Margaret. If we learn anything from this, it's that empathy should guide our rules, not just legalistic enforcement. I'm grateful we've evolved." Many nodded in agreement. A mother talked about how the new approach allowed her to keep a bright mural her daughter painted on a fence. Another resident described adding a small bench dedicated to her grandparents, something that once might have drawn a citation. The group recognized that these personal touches enriched the community rather than harming it. By the meeting's end, the board drafted a list of potential updates to the bylaws, adding flexible provisions for memorials, personal art displays, and minor yard decorations. Everyone cheered the shift toward a friendlier, more human-centered approach. Looking around at the smiling faces, David felt Margaret's spirit near. Her memory had not only endured, but had also helped shape a kinder future for Greenhaven. Spring arrived gently, and with it came the re-blooming of David's memorial garden. True to their promise, neighbors returned to help replant fresh flowers and remove dead winter foliage. This time, the garden was bigger than ever, twice its original size, with carefully arranged beds of roses, bluebells, and daisies. In the center rose a graceful ornamental trellis, a gift from Ernest and Lisa. Stepping stones lined the perimeter, each etched with a personal message or memory. Some commemorated Margaret directly, others honored lost loved ones, or simply celebrated life. One stone read, "In unity we grow." Another, "Love wins." The effect was breathtaking, a testament to how adversity had forged a bond among residents. On a bright Saturday morning, they held a small dedication ceremony. Children played soft tunes on recorders, an impromptu flower choir sang a simple ballad, and David, teary-eyed, expressed his thanks to everyone involved. "Margaret always believed in the goodness of people," he said quietly, facing the cluster of neighbors gathered around. "And you've all proven her right." A wave of applause rippled through the group. The moral victory was complete. Not only did the garden survive Karen's onslaught, it had flourished beyond anything David could have imagined. In the months and years that followed, David's memorial garden became a cherished landmark in Greenhaven. New families who moved in would pause, read the stepping stones, and inquire about Margaret. They'd hear the tale of how a grieving widower's modest tribute ignited a battle for the neighborhood's soul, how a relentless HOA Karen tried to stamp out individuality, only to spur a wave of unity that transformed the community. The garden thrived across seasons. When marigolds faded, other blossoms took their place. The stepping stones remained a constant, each inscribed message capturing a piece of Greenhaven's collective story. Residents often gathered on David's lawn for small candlelight vigils, holiday sing-alongs, or just quiet moments of reflection. As for Marilyn Karen, heartless, she never publicly apologized or returned to an HOA meeting. Rumor had it she sold her house and moved out of state, though a few doubted if she'd truly left for good. Some believed the anonymous "I'm sorry" note had come from her, though no one would ever be certain. In any case, her legacy was overshadowed by the lasting positivity she had inadvertently inspired. David Caldwell went on living, finding new ways to channel his love for Margaret into acts of kindness around the neighborhood. And though the ache of her absence never fully left him, he drew strength from the living monument blossoming outside his window, a testament to love's power to endure, to outgrow adversity, and to bring people together in the most unexpected ways.